I wanted to be so strong. And I finally was just like, I can't. They are not going to change. This is not going to get better. I wasn't myself anymore and I hated my work. I can't fix this broken system. I just decided I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't have it in me. At that point, I just didn't know what I was fighting for. Throughout all of this, it was always this hope that it would get better, that eventually I would get to the right person, that eventually they would care. And it was just awareness like, this is never going to get better. At that point, they had taken any joy I had in my career.
The world is obsessed with fast track success. And it's easy to think people become successful overnight. But let's face it, more often than not, what we see on social media is total BS. I'm here to look past the perception of perfect success and focus on life's detours, perceived mistakes, and even wrong choices, and understand the real road traveled up the career ladder. After all, we're all effing up. Heather Wallander never planned to become an employee advocate, but after experiencing workplace discrimination, she realized how easy it is to find yourself in a fight you never wanted, simply because you asked questions when something felt off. Heather knows what it's like to navigate the system without experience and how critical early guidance in sport is once the harm starts. Through her work with others, she has seen how the harmful effects of discrimination, retaliation, and gaslighting can be amplified when forced to face this alone. All of this is why she has set out to make the tools, community, and guidance she once needed and benefited from available to others. Prior to this, Heather's career spanned engineering, data analysis, sales, and marketing. She was just beginning to climb the leadership ladder when her path shifted, leading her on a mission to empower employees and disrupt discrimination. Heather, welcome to Effing Up. I'm excited you're here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Why don't we start by having you talk about what you do for work currently?
I run a nonprofit. We started in January. We are still very early phases, fine tuning the products and the solutions that we're offering. Our goal is to help employees facing discrimination during the earlier stages when it's first starting, before somebody would actually have a legal case. A lot of people know lawyers exist to help with discrimination. What people don't realize is that lawyers aren't really there to help you prevent discrimination. They're more there to help you recover damages once the financial harm has happened. Our goal is to help people before they get to that. Ideally, help them handle it internally, or maybe figure out if it even is discrimination. Maybe it's just toxic. We're trying to help educate employees on what the rights are. How do you recognize discrimination? How do you verify it so that they can be more proactive to protect themselves?
And as someone who has worked in HR for most of my career, even having HR available at a company, employees find it really hard to trust the HR department with this topic in particular. It's a really unsafe territory. And you feel like if you ask questions, you're going to get in trouble. This is a great resource for folks that don't feel comfortable in their own environment. That's a nice resource for people to have.
My goal is someday for us to get to a point where it's hard to frighten us because the topics around fighting discrimination tend to be about legal fights. And obviously, like if that's where somebody is and they need help understanding like kind of, how to go about getting lawyers, understand the EOC process will help them with that. But our goal is to help HR because people are afraid to go to HR. And most people don't understand how to communicate their concerns to HR. They go to HR with feelings. They go to HR with, I'm frustrated. They go to HR without evidence. I help people prepare to go to HR. Let's make sure you already have the conversation with your boss. Let's probe around what you're upset about to make sure that we're certain before you escalate. Because if it isn't discrimination, just a toxic workplace, you're not protected against retaliation. It's not our job to do HR's job, but the way I tell people is, look, you need a favor from somebody or you need somebody to help you. You show up to sell them on helping you. That's how I go about it. It's like, you need to convince them that there is something here more than just you being frustrated you didn't get a promotion.
Thank you so much for sharing. Let's take a peek at your childhood. If there's any event or teaching that ties in to your career, who you are professionally.
My professional career has taken a big turn from the environment I grew up in. My dad owned his own company, he's an electrician. He was successful and there's a work ethic there. But my professional environment is much different, working with your hands versus going to college and working in an office, being at a computer. I learned the value of working hard, stick with it, keep going. That stuck with me more so than anything that shaped directly the career I went into.
When you thought about your future, did you think about higher education? Did you have in mind what you might want to do for work?
Not really. My parents wanted me to graduate high school, but there wasn't really ambitions beyond that. I went to community college because the only reason I even knew other people were planning for college was because I had friends who were doing it. A lot of my friends did go to college, go to a 4-year university right away. I spent 2 years getting my associate's degree, and then I went into my 4-year degree. I had worked right out of high school full time, and then I had kind of a grown-up job doing outside sales, and then I was going to school full time, and then I was also in sorority, and I was the social chair of our sorority. So I was doing a lot of things and I burned out. So there was a brief period where I dropped out of school for a year or 2 years maybe before I went back.
Drop out during your first community college program or the second or in between?
I got my associate's degree. All that was fine. I went to Sacramento State, but then I decided to drop out and move down to San Diego. I only had one more year left. When I went back to school, I was living in San Diego. So I transferred schools. That actually put me behind a bit because most of my stuff transferred, but not all of it. So it ended up taking me 5 years total to graduate, unless you count the break. That was 6 or 7 years. But working full time while going to school full time, that burnout was the challenge there.
Talk to me about San Diego. I know about the burnout, but why did you decide to relocate it?
The burnout was the main reason at that point. There was this guy that I liked or dated or whatever we were. He moved down to San Diego. So I went down to visit him. I was intoxicated by this lifestyle that he promoted and associated with San Diego. He worked as a server in a restaurant, but he had a lot of freedom. He was very anti the structure of going to corporate work, being a slave to these corporate overlords. I think at the time I was so burnt out. I was wanting an escape. It's wonderful when somebody gives you an excuse to do it. And that's what happened. So I moved down to San Diego and basically couldn't hook down a job. I went from being this incredibly responsible person because I got good grades in school. Like I said, I was a social chair. I planned the events. I was always moving. And then I was just always drinking, not really productive. I went through this weird place. It was a combination of things, wanting to be young, going right into working full time.
It sounds like you didn't give the space to be young.
Not at all. I went right into
focus driven, doing all the things, go, go, go. And so you came up for air and you're like, hold on, I'm going to take a beat. And so then you kind of go back the other way a little bit.
I went all the way on the other side. I went like the full other end of responsibility. I couldn't hold down a job and I had been making good money before this. So I had managed to drive myself into massive debt and I wasn't paying my credit cards or my car payment. The car got repossessed. I got into an accident with a friend's car. She didn't have insurance on her car. Because I didn't have a car, I no longer had insurance. I had to pay for their car to get fixed. I was on unemployment, so I could no longer afford rent. And I was overweight, out of school, just kind of a mess compared to what I had been a few years prior. So I was like, all right, I'm going to apply to school. I'm going to get back in, get a job. I'm going to take care of myself. I don't know if you remember, there was this workout called Insanity. It was like a 90-day.
It was Insanity.
It was like P90X, if you heard of that, but it was a follow-up one that was like pure cardio. And I did that for 60 days. And I'll say this, I looked amazing by the end of it. I mentioned that I was at this end and then I swung all the way over here. And then I literally just right back to the other end. So I got a job at Verizon, which was nice because I could work and go to school full-time. I went to school full-time Tuesdays and Thursdays.
So then as you're approaching graduation with your degree, what are you thinking you're going to do for work?
I was in outside sales before, and even at Verizon, I was in retail sales. I got my bachelor's in marketing because it felt like the logical place to go. I knew I didn't want to do sales forever, so I went into marketing. I took a big pay cut because the company I worked for was a small software company. They didn't have big budget or anything, and there wasn't a lot of data analysis or testing. There's like you create ads and you put them out there, and then you're like, I don't know, maybe they worked. They're out there. This is early on when data science wasn't as heavily a thing. I had done a class on my last day of my marketing program that had a video called Did You Know? And all these things about data that make you think. And then he introduced the idea of a data science career. So I actually ended up going back to school because I hated marketing. At this point, I had met my husband and my husband had told me he chose his bachelor's based on what would pay him. No one was talking to me about how to get paid and how to make money. And I was like, well, I'm going to choose my next degree to make money. That's how I landed at information systems. I applied to San Diego State for my master's. I got in. And that's how I ended up transitioning out of that. But in between that, I did marketing and I hated it.
It looks like you were at the Vision InfoSoft and then HD Supply overlapping your time getting your master's. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was actually at a few companies while I was still getting my master's. I was at Vision InfoSoft when it started. I went to HD Supply. Then I was at Green Media. That's the first time. That was where I was like a programming analyst. So that was really where I started to use. I had taken a coding class as part of my information systems degree and I loved it. At that point, I didn't really want to apply again to go back to get an engineering degree. So I was like, well, maybe I can learn how to code through this and use an analyst role to pivot into that. So that job was the first one where I did that for my green media. And then I ended up going to PlayStation.
You finish your master's, you're a decade into your career.
Decade into my career and barely starting it at the same time. But I'd been working, but wasn't in the field that I was about.
How were you feeling? Were you feeling down on yourself, like I should be doing more, I'm not where I want to be, or invigorated because you have your master's, you've had a couple jobs under your belt?
I feel like I was feeling pretty good because I think the reasons I chose marketing was I mentioned earlier, school was not a priority. I never would have, if you would have told me I was smart enough to be a software engineer, I would have laughed before I ever took my first coding class. It wasn't like I knew that that was like a high paying career. I knew that it was challenging, but it wasn't like anyone was sitting me down and being like, are you sure you don't like this, Heather? When I had to take that first programming class, I was so nervous. And I ended up getting the highest grade in the class. I just freaking loved it. There was definitely awareness of like, oh, I wish I would have started this earlier. Because at this point in my career, I'm really trying to prove myself and earn that software engineering title. When I'm at PlayStation, I'm doing this analyst role. And I really, really want this title just to have the validation. I actually have been doing coding projects. I had access to engineering some of our tools in the back end. So I was already doing the work. I was just so focused on proving it, always chasing something, always trying to topple some kind of challenge. I really was just so laser focused on getting that title. And then I get the title and I was like, oh, I don't know if I actually like this job. I did it at PlayStation and then I got another job at another company as a systems engineer at IPsoft, or what is now Amelia, or actually now it's called SoundHound. Once I was in the job, I didn't love coding and not having engagement with people. And then I was like, oh, like when you are an engineer, you don't have as many meetings because a lot of times you're just trying to meet a
Individual
deadline.
contributor.
You're usually working independently on different things versus collaborating or talking with people. I still loved the coding part of it. I just was like, I don't really like how much solitude time there is.
In regards to PlayStation, were there any challenges there? It sounds like when you got the promotion to software engineer 2, that it wasn't quite what you thought it would be. Was that tough on you?
When I became a software engineer, I was promised one salary and I was not given that salary. Around the time my husband and I were considering leaving San Diego just to explore somewhere new, so we ended up moving to Miami, there was disappointment with being promised a certain salary and then not getting it. The other thing is that my boss rated me at 3 and I was furious. My boss the year before had told me to not rate myself above a 3, to rate myself a 3 and then let him advocate for me. And then I ended up with a 4 on a 1 to 5 scale. And so the next year I have a new boss who I've just gotten promoted to, who I don't have this discussion with. I just assume this is how it is. And I'm so angry because he gave me a 3 and I was like, mediocre. Like I've been coding or not mediocre, but average. Like I've been going above and beyond what my career is. That's why I just got promoted. Now, granted, he was like, well, technically this is about the role you're in now. And I was like, like that doesn't count. I was in that other role for 11 months. Like that should play a part. But that was actually when I mentioned, I don't have a problem negotiating. I've never had a problem advocating for myself. And that was when I realized you never put in your performance review less than you think you did. If you think you were a 5, you put.
That is a ridiculous game.
Yeah. That's why I never played that game again.
But as an employee, how are you supposed to know? You're looking at your manager like they're the expert. So you're like, okay, I'm going to follow along. I don't even understand how these people function this way. It's just so.
That varies so much. I was at the same company, but it can vary so much from leader to leader. It was a valuable lesson. I learned that I was going to show up the way I wanted to show up, regardless of my boss. You adapt to working with them and their work style or whatever. But the things that matter, the performance reviews and things like that, I was not going to ever reduce myself on paper again. I was furious between that and the raise. When they actually gave me the title, they didn't give me the raise right away. It's like, all right, we'll give you the title change, but you have to wait until the review cycle. And then when I did the review cycle, they said, well, technically we're rating you on where you're at in this role, not that role. And so that was the problem. So I would say that helped contribute to me leaving.
You leave.
We were moving to Miami and they wouldn't let me work remotely right away or go to a contractor role. It's ironic because they actually did offer me the contractor role 6 months later and I ended up staying at the company I was at instead. They wouldn't let me stay and work remotely and still continue to do the job. There were concerns around a full-time employee going to contractor. I actually cried when I left. That was the first job that I really liked. I liked the people I worked with. I was so proud of what I had done there. And that was the first job where I was really, really sad to leave. I remember driving home. I don't think I ever told anyone that. I was sad to put that chapter behind me.
Sure.
When I think about discrimination throughout my career, like being underpaid, you look back on later and you're like, oh, well, I wonder if this would have happened if I wasn't a woman.
Yeah. Talk to me about your time at IPsoft. What challenges did you face there?
That was where I realized I don't want to be an engineer full time because it was different than PlayStation in the sense that when I was in an office, I also didn't know anybody. And so when you're working remotely and you're working in this less collaborative role, you're alone a lot of the time. And I was really unhappy. It's not all the company's fault, but I do think the company was not really set up well to have a handful of remote employees. Most companies aren't, unless everyone is remote, like it doesn't function that well. But the best thing about that job was when I traveled to an offsite and I found out about the role called the sales engineer or solutions architect. It's different everywhere. It's kind of this hybrid role. Instead of being the one helping customers implement it, you would sell the product and be the person that helps them test it and demo it.
That's like
Just
touching both of your worlds that you enjoy.
It honestly still is. Like, it was the career I was made to do. There is no career I don't think that I will ever find that was made for me like sales engineering was.
Interesting, because you knew intimately what you were selling. It's not like you were handing a script and you're like, oh yeah, we have these widgets to sell. You're like, I can build what we're talking about.
Yeah. I love mentoring people, helping people. And it was this perfect hybrid environment where I got to work with customers on new technology they weren't familiar with, introduce it to them, explain the technical parts, have technical conversations, help them test it, build out custom demos, but not have to do that full time.
It sounds like this role was meant for you, but you were only in it for 5 months. Why did you leave?
Oh, well, I just went and did it at Okta.
Why
And
did you decide to leave the company and go to Okta?
there's two things. I have never been the most patient person, and I was being tiptoed into the role, not really being given clients to work with. There was apprehension because I was new. I was still learning. These were big, large enterprise customers. I would have been selling to some of the largest banks in the country, some of the biggest names in the country. They obviously don't just throw anyone into those situations, but I was impatient. So I applied to Okta. Okta ended up removing the role months before that when I was applying. When they came back to me and they offered me the role, things were just starting to pick up at my new job. So now I had a decision to make. Do I want to continue in my new role now that I'm finally getting clients, or do I want to go and do a job where I really like the product? We had used Okta at PlayStation, so I was familiar with it. I thought it was a growing technology. At that time, I felt like AI was a bit of smoke and mirrors. It worked. It did what it did, but it was a heavier lift than it is now. All of these tools now, they're much more advanced. But at the time, they weren't really as advanced as I thought. Maybe they were going to be, at least not out of the box. And so I really wanted to go work at a company where I knew it would work.
You were in that role for almost 2 years, and then I assume were promoted to the team lead role for commercial specialist team.
Yeah. Okta itself is two types of products. One of them is the out of the box product, which is like what employees typically use when they're logging into the various tools that they use as a company. The demos for that and the tests for that are repetitive. The product doesn't change that much. There's a few things you can customize, but in general, the product is designed to work for you to implement it, easy to follow guides, very straightforward. I got bored very quickly doing that. I thought the product was excellent. I was just like, God, I don't want to do any more of these demos. I think it's anymore. It's too repetitive. The other product was still growing fairly new. It was customer identity. I used the example, Major League Baseball was one of their major customers. When you log into the MLB to buy baseball tickets, you don't realize that's Okta because they've customized everything to look like them, but that's Okta powering it behind the scenes. That was what I sold, was this much more custom product. There's a lot more customization around the flow. What does it look like for a user to log in? Do we prompt them for a text message verification? Do we not? Do we only do it in some situations? Is there additional steps you want to ask a person before they log in? So there was like an endless number of things that could be different per customer. It was newer technology, something that was still coming. I loved that role. I loved the sales engineering role, but this was even more so like a kind of this perfect balance of being highly technical, working with highly technical people, and then getting to collaborate with people working. I was always on calls every day.
Why did you leave?
Because they weren't paying me enough. So I left for 5 months and came back and negotiated for them to pay me what I was worth. But I didn't realize it at the time. This is why I tell people about, when I talk about discrimination, how easy it is to not realize it's happening to you. How easy it is to be like, God, I feel like I'm not being paid enough. I feel like I should be trying to negotiate, trying to bring it up, trying to proactively talk about it. Because I was well aware, like, if you want to make sure that you get compensated correctly or promoted, you start talking for like 9 months before. You don't wait till 2 months before. You start talking about it.
Yep.
You are ready to go and checking the boxes before you get there. And so I started talking to my boss about feeling like I was underpaid like 9 months before I left. And they basically said they'd keep it in mind. And when they did, they didn't compensate me like I would have expected. And so I left.
You left for material security as a security architect.
Mhm.
Did they headhunt you? Did you apply?
During most of this, I'm in New York City. And there's a guy on the West Coast and he's in San Francisco. We're the top performing regions. That's relevant because it's easier to be a top performer when you're in a region with a lot more
Sure.
opportunity. Him and I were both in equal areas and we were friendly competition. Him and I were always at the top. Him and I were starting around the same time, trying to be successful. When he left the company, I tried to bring him over to the team. I had just become team lead and I tried to bring him over and be like, are you sure you don't want to join? And he was like, no, I'm going to go to this company. And he was like, actually, I'm going to come back and I'm going to headhunt. I'm going to get you. You're going to come with me over there. I don't know if I reached out to him or he reached out to me. I don't remember how that conversation when I ended up going to the company, but that's how it happened. Was like him and I, like I said, we were competitors, but I think they were trying to create that same
You were
environment.
feeling
there.
each other's fire.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went over there. You were there for 7 months. And then when did Okta start calling?
So one of the things we're calling out is me and the CEO did not get along at this other company.
And material security.
Yeah. He's no longer the CEO. So for anyone who tries to go look it up, he's not there anymore. But I don't think he liked me. I was not there long enough to verify if it had anything to do with the fact that I was a woman. But I definitely know that there were other women who were feeling the same kind of
What are
engagement with-
examples that led you to believe he didn't like you?
He was overly critical to me. So for example, the very first time I did a demo, he let me get 15 minutes in. He paused it and he spent 45 minutes critiquing me, just ripped me apart. And I mean, I've been at this company for 2 months.
For 45 minutes? My God, what do you
Yeah.
have? 45 minutes?
Dissecting everything I had done wrong. I ended up having to go off camera because I was so upset. I ended up crying. The worst part was I did that demo right before I left for my bachelorette party. I was doing this demo and then I had to wash my face real quick and leave to go to my bachelorette party. Him and I ended up having a conversation. It was a good conversation because I don't mind advocating for myself. I shared with him. I wasn't confrontational, but hey, that made me feel awful. I feel like I'm going to be more self-conscious. I never quite found my footing there. I'll be honest, I wasn't that good of an FC at that job. It was a combination of things. One was I wasn't that excited about the product that was being sold transparently. That's on me. I should make sure.
Well, how could you have any ounce of confidence after an experience like that?
Yes, I was already struggling with the product to get excited about it. And I didn't love the way they did their presentation style. I'm more hands-on, walk you through it. And theirs was more presentation and then a very short demo. Regardless, he was critical. Like he was constantly critical. And this is the other reason why I talk about discrimination. Because again, I don't know for sure. But what I do wish I would have done is tried to do more to understand what was happening and what was playing a role. Because maybe I wouldn't have stayed as long as I even did. I was so dead set on staying at least a year. I just felt like trash. I felt just like a garbage employee the entire time I was there. And I don't think that that is a coincidence because these problems ended up happening. I knowing other women that were there and whatnot. Like I wasn't the only one. And he wasn't just like this towards women. Like it did happen with others as well. So that's why I say I don't know everything, the extent of it. One of the things I really liked, you notice I talk really fast. One of the things I really liked about him was he talks fast. And if you talk fast, you love it when people talk fast.
You're on the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't get distracted. It's very easy for me to get distracted if people talk slow. I love that about him, but he criticized me constantly about it.
Oh, he could talk fast, but you can't talk fast.
Yeah. A few years later, a company contacted me to interview, and I saw they were connected to a lot of people at this company. I was up front and I said, look, I see a lot of people at some point you're going to have this conversation, so I'm just going to get ahead of it and be upfront and just be like, if you ask for feedback there, especially if you go to CEO, you probably want to just check that now before we even get started because we did not get along and I do not know what he'd say. All I know is that after that, they did not want to continue the interview. The person did not tell me, but I'm sure that he ripped me apart, which I think says something because I was very respectful, even though I did not like the CEO. I did not bash him. It's funny because they had already scheduled the second interview and they just canceled it. That's how I ended up being like, oh, hey, I thought I had this interview. Like, what happened?
Wait, so how did you end up back at Okta? What happened?
All of this is happening and I'm unhappy at this company. I'm struggling. My old boss contacts me and says, hey, I just wanted to check in with you, reach out. She doesn't offer me the job, but she opens the door.
Yeah.
Like a month later, I was just done. And honestly, I always look back and think, why didn't I just go somewhere new? But what I was afraid of was, what if I dislike this company so much? What if I go somewhere else and I hate the next company? I can't keep job hopping, right? I don't want a job every 6 months. That was really my fear. It was like, I don't want to go somewhere new and then not like it there as well. Maybe, because at this point, I'm still like, maybe this is a me thing. So I went back to the company, even though I knew that there was this merger and acquisition going on with our former competitor, that it was chaos. I still talk to people. I knew that I was walking into chaos and all of the same frustration.
Well, when you got the offer, did you get the pay that you expected?
Yeah. Well, they tried to underpay me. My boss knew how much I had left for, and they tried to offer me $15K less. And I was like, oh no. Absolutely. I was honest about it. What I said was like, the last thing I want to do is come back, be unhappy with my pay, and then just leave again. So I would rather just not come back. I didn't even have to interview. When I contacted her, she had an offer to me that day. I pushed back on this, and then they came back with an offer that was 25K more than what they had offered me, 10K more than I was making at the last company.
You were there for another 2 years and 7 months. Talk to me about that next venture with them.
The next couple of years were some of the years I'm most proudest of in my career, and they're also some of the worst years of my career. So I had been a team lead. I had been running the team. They all answered to an actual manager, but I was actually the one running meetings and one-on-ones and mentoring and choosing who to hire. When a role came up they were going to expand and make the team I was running an official team. The specialist team was kind of a subset of the greater team. They were going to make us an official team. I got tapped as one of the people to be a manager along with 2 others. I had to go through 7 or 8 interviews. It was a long interview process. I got the job. I was really excited. Obviously, there was some pushback because people were not happy about the fact that I had left. Like, oh, maybe all you have to do is leave. And everyone forgets that I had been doing all of this work for a year and a half before I left. Like, technically, it wasn't my fault that they hadn't given me the job, and they forced me to leave to get the pay. But that is how people saw it. So people weren't thrilled about it. But ultimately, as I stepped into the role and I ended up becoming the go-to manager across the teams.
And 4 months after your return that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I got promoted soon after. So I came back in November and I was promoted.
You have to think that people are feeling like, oh, she's so super shiny. She leaves, she comes back, and it's so quick. Her rise is just so quick. Not thinking about the full context in which you've described here. Like, they're just jealous.
I get there wasn't a valid, like, well, maybe I just need to leave and come back. I think people kind of get ahead of themselves on whether or not it would work out the same way for them. Ultimately, that was very short-lived, and then things just settled in. There was a lot of conflict after this merger and acquisition. I ended up being the resource that people were glad was there because I still operated like them. I was from the original company. Our team did really well. Things were fantastic. And in May, a new boss for me is hired. So I'm still rolling up to the same VP that I was answering to, but now I have a new director that's in the middle.
Okay.
My boss wanted me to meet this director. I wasn't a hiring decision maker, but she did want me to meet him before he started. We were supposed to meet, we scheduled to meet, and he just didn't show. And when I messaged him, I remember being really frustrated because I mentioned we were going through a very chaotic M&A and I was working insane hours and I just didn't have a lot of free time. And I remember being like, okay, then just to not show up was kind of rude, especially for somebody you're going to answer to. But
yeah,
that was the first time I had interaction with him. And then he came and I met him. He came to
he got hired. And that no-show meeting never got rescheduled before he got hired.
I also wasn't a decision maker. My boss didn't ask me to interview him, give my feedback. So I guess it just didn't matter. It's not my goal to assume this had anything more to do with the fact that maybe he got busy. So I let it go. He gets hired. He starts. The very first time I meet him, I had actually created an entire training program that was outside of the scope of my role. I was trying to get things back on track because the sales team was struggling to sell the new product we acquired. And I was trying to give them as much information as I could as quickly as possible so that we could work better together to be successful. And that training program ended up being incredibly successful, ended up rolling out across the entire segment. But this was the very first group. The very first time he meets me is during this offsite. He's going to sit in on the meetings, sit in on the presentations, and see how I operate, see what I do. He was very complimentary at first. Like, not many employees do what you do. This is very rare. This is excellent. It seemed to me like he was going to be just like every other boss I've had, which is that I am a workhorse you can count on. I'm always going above and beyond. I'm going to do what you asked me to do. And then I'm probably doing 4 other things that you didn't ask me to do that I'm going to tell you about that'll make you look good. Most of my bosses just really liked me. I assumed that was going to go. And then it didn't go that way. As things played out, the discrimination started in terms of there were things that he had said before. I won't go into all the details, but we get to them suddenly trying to change my role. I was in a very technical role. They tried to put me on a team that was the less technical product. They tried to change everything. The 2 men that were my counterparts weren't considered, which I was very upset about. I pushed back, got the role decision reversed, and then the retaliation started. And it got worse over the next 18 months.
What took place?
It started with the role change, and that was reversed that I mentioned. The next thing that happened was 2 months later, one of the managers left. So I mentioned there's 3 of us doing this role, and they decided to give all of the responsibility to my male counterpart that had stayed. Now, I'm not putting him down, but my team was overperforming. Like, my team was knocking out of the park. I mentioned I was also doing all this stuff, and I didn't understand why, given all of this, that They weren't even at least splitting the teams, splitting the
Yeah.
responsibility. Because he had, for example, 12 direct
At
reports. And
least
I had,
without a conversation to discuss how that would look.
yeah,
Yeah.
my team had sold 50% of the revenue for my segment. While there were 3 teams and technically we should have all owned 33%, my team was dominating. We only had 4 people. The other teams were bigger. He ends up with 12 direct reports and I had 4. He has 2/3 of the country he's managing and I have a third. And keep in mind that I'm the person that a lot of the managers go to, not just my team. I'm talking about like the wider team and segment, all of them coming to me whenever they need help with things. So I am just still showing up and delivering when they do this. I raise concerns about that. And it's the first time I ever reference gender being an issue. Like that, I basically say it as like, I feel like this doesn't look great for other women. Like basically you're pushing me aside, even though everyone can see the
You're
numbers.
trying to have the conversation. Hey, FYI, let's fix this. You're trying to handle it above the board.
So one of the things worth noting with this is during that first rule change that I said was reversed, when I tried to go to my director, I did try to go to him twice. And then the other director in my segment, the last time I talked to him before I wrote the email that reversed the decision was him shutting me down and being like, we're just not, like, he talked to me like I was a child, like, we're just not going to talk about this anymore. Like, it's just done. I remember being really upset because I was like, yeah, but you're messing with my career. Like you actually, this will change my career trajectory and you won't even have a conversation with me about it. He clearly was not happy about the decision that was made to reverse it after I emailed my VP. So when this happens, this next thing happens with the split. I go to my VP and I actually have a conversation with her for like an hour, hour and a half. I'm trying to understand why. He explained to me like, why you would make this decision. And the excuses they were giving me were things like, oh, well, he's worked with them before. And I was like, yeah, but I've worked with some of them before. And like, we don't want to rock the boat. And I had arguments for all of them. She wouldn't reverse it. So I ended up escalating to my senior VP and my HR business partner. But I don't do anything behind people's backs. I'm very open and transparent. I'm just trying to get this stuff resolved. So when I emailed, I actually did CC him because I wanted him to have visibility. It's not like I ripped him apart. I did not attack him. I talked about the decision as a collective decision among my VP and the 2 directors and point out my concerns. My director called me up, asked me to jump on a Zoom call, and I did. He said, I asked him, I said, how are you? And he says, well, I'm pissed. And I was like, okay. And then he told me that it wasn't about my performance and numbers. It's about our concerns regarding your maturity level. And we just don't think you're mature enough to handle the additional responsibility. I'll never forget the sinking feeling of like, I knew there was something. I knew that it did not make sense. And now you've just validated it. The problem is California, you're not allowed to record calls. It's a 2-party consent state. So I don't have any evidence of that. Of course, he denied it later when I tried to raise concerns about this, but everyone just kind of ignored me.
That's insulting. Why do you want to make that up and spread that about yourself? You don't want people to hear that kind of stuff about you. That's ridiculous.
I mean, nobody cared. Everybody assumed that I was immature.
Did he give you any examples of how you could be more mature?
I asked him for an example, and what he said to me was that one of the things to know about this role reversal is that I only had a week's notice to process all of this. Actually, I didn't even have a week. And I had asked them not to start communicating it until I had a chance to talk to my team on Monday morning. That following Monday, I had to communicate to my team. And I was emotional. I mentioned I was still reeling from this decision and then the fact that I was trying to push back on it. When I spoke with them, I still tried to stay professional. But I did say, my boss had told me to say it wasn't my decision. Like, this isn't my decision. I don't know what the plan is. Like, I don't know why they're doing this. I can't give you answers. My boss did not like the way I had handled it because my team was upset. They did not understand why we were top performers and why they were losing their manager and no one else was being changed. My boss, when I asked him for the example, he wasn't actually on that call, but he had said the way I had handled that call required him to get on the call the next day to smooth things out with my team. My response was, you told me you wanted to get on the call the next day so you could communicate to them the decision was reversed and why. Like, you did not raise this concern about maturity level or how I had handled it when we spoke 2 months ago. He didn't really have an excuse to that. So I remember getting off the call. It's like, how do you end that call, right? And like, I was like, all right, well, I guess thank you for the feedback. I don't know what else to say at this time, so I'm just going to go. But I was so upset because at this point, I didn't know what to do. So I remember I took the rest of the day off and I did tell my VP right away. I said, I don't know if you know this, but he just told me that they didn't give me the additional responsibility because of my maturity. She just said, I didn't know I'm on other calls. I'll look into it. Never ever checks on me after that. Nothing. I spoke to my HR business partner and my senior VP about this, told them both what happened. The HR business partner told me nothing to see here. There's nothing to investigate. The only reason I have evidence of me escalating those concerns is because I insisted on documenting it and saying I wanted to follow up with something in writing. And the only reason I needed to do that was because I had a best friend who worked at HR at a different company who handled investigations who was like, you need to make sure that you're documenting your concerns and communicating those. So I sent him an email afterwards saying like, here's the timeline of events. I really hope that you'll look into it. But he wouldn't even open an investigation for me.
The HRBP.
My HR business partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
2 months later, my boss sent the text message that ended up getting him fired that he didn't send to me. He thought was so funny. He told me about it. I reported that a month later. The company sat on it for 6 months.
Wait, sorry, back it up. What is the text message she sent that got him fired?
It's hard to talk about because the problem with talking about it, and I probably have before, but I try to limit it because one of the biggest issues is that it's racism and sexism, and the racism would actually tie into somebody's last name, which makes it hard for me to talk about. But basically, somebody left and he sent a song to somebody tying in his last name to a sexist comment and sent it to her. And then he thought it was so funny that he sent it to me. And the ironic thing about this is that we had just talked the day before. I had actually just apologized to him for all of that stuff I just mentioned. I had apologized to him because I wanted to stay in my job and I really wanted to make it work. And I was like, he's not going anywhere. So maybe I am the problem, because that's what happens when nobody will help you, is you think you are the problem.
Well, you're being gaslit. So what are
Yeah.
you supposed to think?
So I apologized to him. I wanted to bury the hatchet. I wanted to just stay in my job. I loved my job and I was like, whatever. I've had bad bosses before. This is just another.
Bury the hatchet.
Yeah. I will never forget him telling me about the message the next day, because I'll never forget the sinking feeling in my stomach of like knowing or feeling deep down like he was testing me to see what I was going to do with this information. I don't know if that's true, but like it just felt like the timing and how incredibly, like I said, this is what he ended up getting fired over. This was the one thing the company admitted to or acknowledged was a problem, mainly because it's the one thing in writing. So the fact that he brought it up the day after we have a conversation to kind of reset things just feels like it's hard to believe it was a coincidence. But I don't know.
You got the text and then what happened? You said you shared it, but not for a bit later.
Well, I didn't get the text. I was told about the text. I was told he sent it to a female peer who I then verified had received it. The only reason I ended up escalating this further is because my director was in charge of who had a say in who was laid off and who wasn't. I didn't even know we were doing layoffs. There was speculation. But I realized we had 3 women on the specialist team across the segment before layoffs, and we had 16 guys. So it was like 20 people. After layoffs, all 3 women were laid off that were in the field. And I struggled with that because there was only 4 people from the field laid off. And one of them was a guy and 3 of them were women. And I didn't understand. And I looked at the numbers and what I knew about their salaries, and I looked at their roles and where they lived. And I spent 3 weeks looking at every possible excuse, trying to justify how they possibly managed to select all 3 women. I couldn't find any reason to justify it. And I felt sick. I felt like I was standing at a fork in the road. I had felt disappointed by my female VP that was not stepping in to protect me. And I remember feeling like I was these 3 weeks while I was debating what to do. Like, if I don't speak up now, will it only get easier to continue not speaking up? So there was a real concern. I kept wondering, maybe this is what happens in everyone's career. They face this point where they have to make a decision. You either become part of the problem and succeed, or you refuse to be part of it. And I knew deep down, I knew I was putting my career at risk. I don't know that I realized quite how bad it was going to get, but I knew that this was not going to be without consequence. I think people think that I don't do anything without thinking about the consequences. I always do. Like, my case is ongoing and I post, and I know that this interview could become part of discovery if we ever goes to trial. Everything I say, everything I do will be picked apart. I'm well aware of that. I refuse to cower because I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't ask for any of this. If I don't choose to be the person who does the right thing, it will only continue getting easier. And I don't want to be the person that climbs the corporate ladder if I have to step on other women or look the other way while they're stepped on.
Well, you've never chosen the easy route before, so why now?
Well, I really didn't want to give up my career. I remember that's why it took me.
But I mean, you have to put your head in your pillow and go to sleep at night. And I think you were thinking, I'm not going to be able to sleep.
I wasn't able to sleep. And the whole 3 weeks I was sitting on this, I was really upset. The reason why it took me 3 weeks is I really did not want to light my career on fire. I had spent, to your point,
you don't want the spotlight in this way. Who does just want career?
I didn't want to light it on fire. I'd worked incredibly hard to get to where I was. I worked through school full time. While going to school full time, I worked my way up through hours and hours and hours of trying to prove myself. And I was literally like, I'm finally here. I'm making this excellent money. I have my dream job. And I'm like right at the first rung of the ladder. Like, I really want to, my dream was to climb the executive suite. My dream was to be a CIO someday, or a CRO. And like, I really, really wanted that dream for myself. I really wanted it. I will never forget those 3 weeks staring down the road of like, how bad do you want it? Do you want it bad enough to abandon your values? I'll never forget, I talked to my sister-in-law. I called her. I was getting her opinion about going to HR. She basically said to me, she was like, I don't know, Heather, you kind of have to decide, like, in 6 months from now, when you look in the mirror, what decision are you going to not regret? I'm so thankful she asked that, because even though I am sad about what happened with my career, I'm sad and I'm angry at the way that things played out because of things out of my control, but I've never regretted my decision. And she was right. Ultimately, that was what mattered. And I think that had I gone the other route, I think I would still feel guilty. I think I'd be still carrying that burden.
How did you step forward after the 3-week period? What steps did you take?
I went to sales kickoffs, which is an offsite, taking off the sales year. And I really wasn't myself at all that entire trip. Like I was already starting to be excluded, the retaliation, the things like that had started. And when you used to be part of the group that was always included, you feel that. Like it wasn't like starting new and just like not knowing if this is how it is. Like I had always been invited. So I knew I was not being invited. I knew I was being included. I was like, I don't want to be around all of you either, jerks, because the guys all band together. But these are guys that had mentored me for years that I thought would always be in my corner. I was really surprised because this guy kind of shows up as this, I don't know, I guess alpha guy. And they're all like, let me fall in line. I was like, what on earth? But so anyways, this whole week is going on and I'm kind of just keeping them with close people that I am close to. I finally broke down on the last day. I just couldn't take it. It was like being there and trying to pretend things were fine and not feeling fine. I broke down. I went to the VP that I had mentioned that I keep going back to, who I still trusted, and just lost it. Just started sobbing about everything, all the weight I was carrying. And of course, she dismissed my concerns. She gave me her reasons for why they let people go. But she ended up calling HR because I told her about the video. Everybody knew this video was going to be a problem. Takes all of a day to verify, ask that person to send it over to prove that it exists, but they sat on it for 6 months. And during those 6 months, I was denied a promotion. I was excluded from company events, but now I'm being excluded from work events. Now, opportunities that would normally default to me because of the role that I'm in are going to somebody else because I'm being excluded. I think that there was this effort to see if I would just quit. Now, whether or not HR was involved with that, I don't know. But I do know that my leadership, there was an active, ongoing effort to see if my VP this entire time is pretending like she is my friend and she cares about me. Looking back now, I look at our conversations and I think she was using that in to convince me to quit, that maybe like it's just not worth it. And then she started behaving very strangely when she found out I got a lawyer. Long story short, it ended up coming out that not quite the mentor, not quite the friend, not quite the anything I thought she was. Basically, this promotion denial happened. I had gone to HR 2 weeks before saying I was worried about there being bias in the performance reviews. And when I found out I wasn't promoted and my boss told me it was because I was high strung, I knew at the very least nobody had even tried to talk to him about why he was not. Hold on, back it up.
You were told you weren't given a promotion. The reason given was you were too high strung.
Yeah. The first week he had been telling me I was going to get this promotion. And every other manager that was in the SIAM role at this point that hadn't been laid off during the most recent layoffs was a senior specialist manager. It seemed just evident that I was going to be made a senior manager. When the promotion happened, he told me there wasn't budget. A bunch of other people got promoted, but he told me there wasn't budget for it. I got off the call. So I didn't ask about it right away. One of the things I try to do is I know when I can't control my emotions. I know when it's like a heated situation for me and I need to pause before I come back to it. So I got off the call. I didn't really push it on that call. The following week, I prepared to show up and ask questions. I want to understand. And I didn't want it to be confrontational. So I basically was like, hey, I just want to understand. I want to understand why. He told me, because I was like, why did every other manager get promoted to senior manager except for me? And he told me that it was because they were already in the pay bands that were to qualify for senior manager. What he didn't realize he was telling me indirectly was that I was being paid less than all of my peers. That single sentence changed everything for whether or not I could get a lawyer. Like, no, we didn't promote you. The reason why is because they're not paid at the same bracket as all these other people.
Wow.
Yeah. When I pushed for feedback, I said, okay, well, like, I want to understand what the concerns were because all my feedback is positive. Please explain to me. Like, I just want to understand, like, what could I have done differently? Obviously, there's a reason why you didn't promote me. Obviously, there was some factor. So I want to understand.
I'm not going to rest until I get the answer.
I want to understand. The first thing, it's funny, in the work that I do now, I've seen a lot of managers do this. It's one of the things I've realized is very common is like when managers don't have or leaders don't have a good answer for why they're not giving you like something that you've deserved, they tend to deflect towards the future. They say, well, why don't we focus on the future? I've heard like over and over, like this is something they do, like, let's just focus on the future. And I was like, okay, but in order to prepare for the future, I need to understand what went wrong. Like, so we still like,
because we weren't preparing for the future and the future's here and you didn't give it to me. So like, we're just going to keep focusing on the future that's never going to come.
I need to understand what I need to do better if I want to get promoted next year. So please help me understand. He went on this weird tangent first. The first thing he said was he started talking about things that the male peer that I mentioned, they'd given all the responsibility to and then was laid off. He started talking about things that he did. And I was like, okay, but I recognize that that's important, but I don't do that. And he was like, all right, well, so what you need to do is like, you need to keep doing what you did last year. You need to keep doing your performance. And that was really where I pushed. And I was like, yeah, but if it wasn't enough to promote me this year, that performance isn't enough. Like, then there had to have been something else. And that is the point, is like, I think because I just wouldn't let it go. Like, I was like, I really want to understand. And I
You
wasn't
couldn't
doing
handle the
this.
pressure.
I wasn't doing this to be malicious. I have a right to understand why you won't promote me.
Yeah.
So he finally was just like, well, it's because you're high strung. And then he's like, I'm not the only one who says this. Like, there are others that say this as well. And the problem with saying that you're high strung is like, what does that mean? Like, how does that translate to you being concerned about me being in this role? So the next thing I asked is like, okay, well, can you help me understand? Like I mentioned, I had a week between this. So I was preparing. Can you help me understand? I was expecting the feedback to be subjective. So I wanted to make sure that I was ready to push in the questions. And I was like, can you help me understand what exactly I'm doing that makes you think that I am high strung? And he's like, well, you have a lot of energy and sometimes that can be a good thing. But sometimes people are like, whoa. And I was like, okay, can you help me understand?
That is some quality feedback right there.
Yeah. Okay. Can you help me understand if my energy is a good thing? Sometimes. Can you help me understand what actions you'd like me to do going forward? The feedback was you should recognize that your team is going to take their keys from you and you should celebrate more, but make less noise. That felt like an updated version of like, you're complaining too much. Stop complaining and smile more. Be happy.
Be less spoken to. Be muted. You're a female. Back it up.
Yeah. He didn't say smile more, celebrate more. But what is that?
And ironically, none of the men are getting this feedback.
Oh, I can't imagine. I don't know. Maybe somebody will come forward and say, actually, I got that too. But I've shared this story multiple times and no one has done that yet.
No male is getting this feedback.
If I could have recorded that call and the one where he called me immature, like
Smoking gun.
this would not even be a case. Like it would just be one. All I have is all of this evidence around the stuff that proves that the decisions aren't making sense, that they will eventually have to answer for. So then he didn't promote me. Like one of the biggest things that's happening throughout all of this, I'm under the care of a psychiatrist. I was really resistant to doing antidepressants. We eventually ended up putting me on antidepressants because it was just getting really bad. We ended up having to up that dose 3 times. And then I still had an emotional breakdown in July because I shut down. I just stopped feeling anything because it was the only way I could operate.
July of 24 or July of 23?
23. The discrimination starts in September 2022. I go on FMLA July 2023. I leave the company in May 2024.
So how did it escalate for you to leave?
So first the FMLA part, because that's what ends up leading to him getting fired. The FMLA, me going on leave, I found out he was going to get to review me again. At this point, I already had a lawyer. The company knew I had a lawyer. The investigation had been going on for 6 months. I only found out because he messaged me. He tried to schedule time on my calendar to get feedback from my team. As soon as I did that, I was like, wait a minute. If you're asking me for feedback from my team, that means, and keep in mind, we're not even meeting anymore. That's why he has to schedule this meeting to find out how my team's doing. And so I went to my HR business partner and I said, are you going to let him review me again? Because he denied my promotion last time because he said I was high strung. Are you? And her response was like, well, of course, but we're going to take feedback, take it into account. But I was devastated. I was so upset. The other thing, I found out that he was going to be he's on the East, he was in Central, but technically he should have been going to an East Coast event because that was the team he managed. Nobody bothered to tell me I'm on the West Coast. Nobody bothered to tell me he was actually going to be flying into the West Coast and be at a lunch that he was invited to. One of my peers saw he was on the invite. So it really felt like nobody gave a shit about what I was going through. I was keeping it composed. I'll never forget. So I find this out about the feedback. I got on a one-on-one with somebody on my team and I went to open my mouth and I just sobbed. I lost it. And I immediately was like, I am so sorry. This is so unprofessional. This has nothing to do. I have some personal stuff going on. But can we please reschedule this? I've been suppressing my feelings so long. So it was like the dam broke. And I'll never forget because my director, I had just been transferred to a new director. So this old one is going to get to review me, but I'm supposed to be transferring to this new one. And I was hyperventilating when he called me, sobbing uncontrollably. He was like, I had no idea it was this bad. And I'll never forget thinking like, of course you didn't. Do you want me showing up like this every day? Like, I cannot do my job if I am operating in this emotional state. So instead, I have just shut down. And I haven't felt anything. But they knew it was finally that bad. I think that's why they finally acted. They knew I had a lawyer. They had all this evidence. They knew all they were doing was my case was getting stronger and stronger. At this point, you don't want to be on the hook for emotional damages. I went from being at the peak of my career to being broken in a year, empty. Sorry, it makes me so mad when I think about it. Every time I think about where I was and in a year, just being empty. I don't know how else to explain it. That's where I was. I went on leave and while I was on leave, he was let go. You would think that this meant that things would get better.
Did they communicate that to you or you heard this through the grapevine?
I heard it through the grapevine. They communicated to me when I got back. Even then, they refused to acknowledge the discrimination or the retaliation. They said that it was gender harassment only, which is discrimination, but they said they only wanted to admit to the video and they expected me just to be good with that. At that point, we had mediation scheduled, so I wasn't going to push it through that. We were going to hopefully resolve it. Obviously, that did not succeed, or I would not still be fighting. But basically, that's where we're at. And then we went to the end of the year. Retaliation got worse. I had directors and managers refusing to meet with me. One of the worst things that ever happened. You asked why I left. They finally gave me the promotion the next year. They gave me less compensation increase than the year before. But the kicker was the reason why I knew that it was meant to send a point, or at least I feel very confident that it was meant to send a point, is they gave somebody on my team a raise that was bigger than I even knew we could give. So a raise that my jaw was on the floor, that his jaw was on the floor when I communicated. I'm sorry for giving them how much more? I advocated for him. I have no regrets. I am glad he got paid and I think he deserved it, but it sucked because
Apples to apples, that's not okay.
so I had to be the person that communicated it to him, and I still did. I shut off my personal feelings, how I got screwed, and I just celebrated him when we talked about it. And then right after that, one of the managers that refused to meet with me, he wouldn't even respond to the invite. He would just not show up or respond to my messages. He again did not show up, and I think I'm almost positive it was a Tuesday morning, and I was sitting at the desk area that I had kind of off from the kitchen. And my husband was like, Heather, why don't you just leave? My psychiatrist has been talking to me about this. My husband has been like, Heather, you can't do this forever. I wanted to be so strong. We talked about this earlier. I always overcame hurdles. I wanted to be so strong. I wanted to be stronger than this. And I finally was just like, I can't. They are not going to change. This is not going to get better. There was an email I had to send where I was calling out it was retaliation. It was just living like that was awful. And I wasn't myself anymore. And I hated my work. I've had people speculate that the post that I wrote was intentional. Like, first of all, I never wrote a viral post in my life. I barely had any followers. I had no idea what it took to write anything. I think it resonated with people because it was just raw. It was just the truth of everything it was like just needing somebody to hear what I was going through. And then also feeling like no one was ever going to pay for any of this. No one was ever going to know what happened here. And feeling like I can't fix this broken system. I can't fix any of this, but I can warn other women so that they can never, that was the thing, they will never make another woman feel like the only at this company ever again. Not if I can help it. That's why I spoke out. I had no idea it was going to go viral like it did. This guy, I had just found out about the promotion. He wouldn't show up. I was crying again on a Tuesday. And my husband was just like, Heather, this was hard. We haven't even talked. It was hard for him as well.
Such a feeling of helplessness, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I mean, especially because I kept insisting on holding on. Like, my lawyers were also telling me, like, it could hurt my case if I left. But I just decided I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't have it in me. At that point, I just didn't know what I was fighting for. Throughout all of this, it was always this hope that it would get better, that eventually I would get to the right person, that eventually they would care. And it was just awareness, like, this is never going to get better. At that point, they had taken any joy I had in my career. I thought I was meant for this career. I loved it so much. I wrote that post because I genuinely didn't care if I ever worked again, because that's where I was. I had like gone from this super ambitious, super motivated, loved my career to being like, I just don't care. At that point, I was not even sure if I was going to be here much longer. I was in a really bad place. I think they had just raped my dreams for me. I had hung on to it. I joked with my therapist one time. I feel like I was gripping onto that ladder so tightly. They literally had to shake me off because I wanted to hold on.
Yeah. But you said I wanted to be stronger. I wanted to hold on. Yes. Totally recognize your feelings. And I don't want to dismiss that, but you did the harder, stronger thing. You stepped away to take care of yourself. You stepped away because you saw that it was not going to go anywhere. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're feeding into it. It's just going to continue to ruin you.
Yeah.
You did the hard thing by walking away. The easy thing would have just been like, I'll become a robot and I'll do whatever. I'll just dismiss all of this and I'll just keep banging away. Now you're in the fight for your life. This is hard. You are being so strong. You're sharing for others. People responded to that post because they've been in your situation and they haven't been willing to talk about it. You're willing to be the voice. You're being the example. You are doing the strong thing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think at the time, it just felt like accepting defeat. It felt like giving them the win.
Totally.
The ironic thing is that this director, there are still a handful of people, mainly in HR, but the manager who led to me quitting is still there, or at least he was last time I looked. But the director, I don't know if he left voluntarily or was pushed out, and the senior VP suddenly retired and was replaced by a woman. All of that happened after that post went viral, or at least all of that kind of came out after. But it's been very interesting. One of the things I tell people is one of the things that you learn, because I did stay for 18 months, because I stayed represented by a lawyer for 12 months. I had so much advantage. I don't know what the company was thinking. I look back and I'm like, What, like, why would you must have known that lawyer was gonna, like, I was going to leave your company
You're just
with a
hoping you're gonna
well-prepared.
get, because that's what employees do.
But at that point, I think that they were hoping I would take what they offered me and I would just want to go. But it didn't work out quite that way. But I also think at the end of the day, I don't think it's very hard to get the state or these agencies to listen to you. They get so many cases that it's not that they don't want to help employees. I think it's just like they're overwhelmed and they have to pick, they can only prioritize so many cases. I don't think that they ever expected my case, even through California, to get as far as it is. I'm sure that those executives do not like me. I'm sure that they would tell you that I'm a problem and point to my social media and say everything they want. And,
And that isn't them problem.
yeah, this all speaks to how much companies think they're going to get away with. When you look at all of these advantages I had as an employee, having a lawyer, having a best friend that was in HR, that was already building timelines, like the stuff that they could have seen, it speaks to how much companies think they'll get away with. To see all of that and still be like, no, we're going to take our chances. Again, I don't know what was going on behind closed doors, but that's what scares me. And I think that's why I've stayed on this path. What scares me isn't what happened to me. It's what it says about the entire system and how bad things can get when companies think they're going to get away with everything. But anyways, that's kind of how I ended up doing this nonprofit, speaking out. I feel like my career has been in a washing machine, jumbled around, figuring it out since then. But I'm grateful that I'm able to do the work that I'm doing now.
I'm so glad you removed yourself from that situation. I know it wasn't easy, but no one deserves that. That is awful, to be shunned and to not be communicated with and not met with. I mean, that's ridiculous. What made you feel like being on this podcast was a good idea?
I like the idea behind the podcast. All of us like to present this polished story. Your podcast resonates with me on a personal level because I feel like I'm the opposite. I feel like I present the unpolished story to a fault. I've gotten so many messages from people appreciating the fact that I show up the way I do. Maybe it'll help somebody who hears it. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But like,
there's no doubt that it will. I got pushed out in the company, not quite the same way. There's comfort in that, like, somebody understands and it's part of your life you can't get back. And I've moved on, yet there's still a part of me that's very tender about it. And I think that's what you were describing as well.
It's amazing to me how much it can still bring. Like talking to you, like I feel like I'm fine, and then it'll hit that emotional chord. And I think that's why I know it was actual trauma, or it can actually create a trauma effect on people. Because I think the fact that I can always so quickly, I've done like old relationships or stuff. I mentioned those. Like I don't go back and like, cry about my ex, the boyfriend, you know what I mean? Like you moved on or whatever. But
yeah,
this moment, like what happened during that period, I can still be transported back. And I found that's true with other women as well. But yeah, I think even with the podcast, any of the stories, while we might be talking about discrimination and something a lot of people can relate to, I'm sick of the polished stories and these stories of like, everything's wonderful and I just kind of fell into it and I'm magic because I'm so special and I just make great things. Like I feel much more normal when I hear other people talk about their struggles.
I have some rapid fire questions. How do you define success?
I'm still struggling with that because my entire life I defined success as more money and a higher title, being happy or just not, it's okay. Work is always going to be, there's always going to be parts of work that are not the most fun. Today I had to do the financials this morning for the nonprofit. That's not fun. I hate doing the marketing stuff. Despite the fact that I post regularly on social media, I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate creating content. I hate trying to think of ideas to talk about. I hate it. It's hard if you do it so often, or if you feel like it's something that you're supposed to be doing regularly, it becomes, even if you enjoyed it at one point, it becomes a chore. What I describe success as is like, yes, you're going to have those things that are maybe a drag or you don't love doing, but being able to be content with life. I do feel like there comes a point, what I'm grateful for with this experience is it made me stop to realize like that career, that money, that job, that title, that was never going to fill the void. I had to take this time to figure out how to fill the void myself. I had to refine myself. Separate from my career, separate from my title, separate from my whatever. And so success is different to me now. Success is adding value to others and being able to provide for myself. I have shelter, I can eat, or making sure I'm taking care of myself. I don't know how long I have on this, so I'm going to try and make the most of it.
What do you think your path not taken is?
I think most people say the path not taken, and they probably have something more positive. To me, the path not taken is obvious. It's the path where I said nothing. I was a director by now and making more money and still successful and maybe part of the problem. That is the other path that I see for myself. Obviously, depending on the environment you're in, maybe you can leave and find another company that is better to people. I think the other path is being the definition of success and abandoning my value to do it.
Heather, thank you so much for the time you gave and for sharing your story so openly.
Thank you. I really, really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much, Heather. Be well.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Effing Up. I'm your host, Deanne Reinard. If you enjoyed today's episode and you would like to support the podcast, please subscribe, share Effing Up with others, post about it on social media, and/or leave a rating and review. Until next time, count your perceived failures as part of your path to success. After all, we're all effing up.